This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to The World Today. I'm Richard Nta in Nairobi. Here's what's ahead. Russia and the U.S. face off in the United Nations over Moscow's troop buildup near Ukraine. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson apologizes after a report highlights lockdown breaches at Downing Street. And China kicks off the Lunar New Year with a grand celebration. Once again, welcome to The World Today. I'm Richard Nta. Let's begin with the Ukraine tension. Russia and the United States have sparred over Ukraine tensions at the UN Security Council. Many other countries are pushing for de-escalation. William Denslow has more from New York.
After more than 100 meetings were held in private, the United States says that it was time for a public meeting to discuss the tension on the border between Russia and Ukraine. Linda Thomas-Greenfield, the US ambassador to the United Nations, called on Russia to de-escalate and choose the diplomatic path. Russia's UN representative said that he categorically denied allegations from the likes of the US and European allies that it was planning an invasion into Ukraine, saying that those were unfounded allegations.
We fully understand the desire of our American colleagues to whip up hysterics regarding its own situation, regarding the so-called Russian act of aggression. It is something they want to do, including within the Security Council. Security Council's colleagues are being put in an extremely difficult position. This is of great harm, this hysteria, to Ukraine itself.
You've heard from our Russian colleagues that we're calling for this meeting to make you all feel uncomfortable. Imagine how uncomfortable you would be if you had 100,000 troops sitting on your border in the way that these troops are sitting on the border with Ukraine. For us, this is about peace and security.
And China very much refuted the premise of holding a meeting at the UN Security Council. Zhang Jun, the Chinese ambassador to the United Nations, stating that China was in favor of private meetings rather than what was described as megaphone diplomacy. Also stated that he didn't believe that a public forum meeting at the United Nations would be conducive to diffusing tensions. China also very much rejecting the premise of this meeting put forward by the United States, saying that there was a threat to Ukraine's peace and security. China citing that Russia has denied that it has any intentions of invading Ukraine. The message from China, they call on all parties to adhere to more dialogue going forward and for them to implement the Minsk Agreement. William Denslow, CGTN, New York.
Joining us now from Kiev is Guy Henderson. Guy, welcome to the program. Welcome to The World Today, Guy. The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson will soon be heading to Ukraine. What do we know about his visit?
Yes, he'll be here in central Kiev in just a few hours' time to meet with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who's addressing Parliament at the moment, or has a short while ago. That is what sparked this protest you'll see behind me. We'll get to that in a moment. But yes, Prime Minister Johnson comes here at a moment when he is clinging to his job back home for reasons that I think will be included in your programme. But nonetheless, the UK is one of those countries that has been willing to provide, for example, military aid in the form of anti-tank missiles to Ukraine, something the Ukrainians have been very thankful for, and the UK government has also pledged, before Boris Johnson's departure here, £88 million more funding to support Ukrainian stability. In a statement from the Prime Minister ahead of his departure, it is the right of every Ukrainian to determine how they are governed. As a friend and democratic partner, the UK will continue to uphold Ukraine's sovereignty in the face of those who seek to destroy it. And in the UK's view, along perhaps with the United States, in a sort of Western camp in which there are slightly different views on what is the best approach to try and de-escalate this crisis, the UK view heading into these meetings is that Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, is a leader who understands tough words, tough language, and that is why they have provided, for example, lethal aid that other Western countries have been more reluctant to do.
All right, great point that you brought to our attention there, Guy. That leads me to my next question. Are Ukrainians concerned, if at all, by tensions between Russia and the West?
Yes, I think there's been, an evolution in the last couple of weeks, last few weeks, in Ukrainian attitudes to the build-up of Russian forces here. However, Ukrainian officials are at pains to stress that the kind of rhetoric and language coming from some Western countries, particularly perhaps the United States and the UK, those who have been most willing to provide, as I'd mentioned, things like lethal aid to the Ukrainian military, quite concerned that the language they're using, talking about the real possibility of an imminent invasion of Ukraine, has actually been quite inflammatory and potentially also been quite damaging to the Ukrainian economy. We've had President Volodymyr Zelensky speaking in Parliament this morning, in which he's been trying to reassure Ukrainians that the economy, which has been showing signs of struggle recently, is on the mend, is restabilizing after the currency fell quite sharply against the US dollar over the course of the past week or so. But let's get to this protest briefly now. These protesters are here in part to voice their anger at what they see as deeper problems in the Ukrainian economy. This was the president who came to power in 2019 promising to implement a number of reforms that should allow the Ukrainian economy to perform better. These protesters saying that hasn't happened, that President Zelensky has not followed through on all those promises which are backed and supported by organisations like the IMF and Western countries that are supporting Ukraine. But it is at a time when the Ukrainian economy is increasingly struggling. It is causing quite a lot of anger here. This protest at the moment calm, but in the past we have seen this kind of demonstration turn violence in this location.
All right, well, there you have it. A Russia-U.S. face-off at UN Security Council meeting. Guy Henderson in Kiev, thank you for that update and report. In other news, British senior civil servant Sue Gray blames Prime Minister Boris Johnson for a failure of leadership over Downing Street parties that breached a national lockdown. Johnson has delivered an apology to members of Parliament.
Firstly, I want to say sorry. And I'm sorry for the things we simply didn't get right, and also sorry for the way that this matter has been handled. But, Mr. Speaker, it isn't enough to say sorry. This is a moment when we must look at ourselves in the mirror and we must learn. And while the Metropolitan Police must yet complete their investigation, and that means there are no details of specific events in Sue Gray's report, I, of course, accept Sue Gray's general findings in full. And above all, her recommendation that we must learn from these events and act now.
Gray investigated 16 separate gatherings held in the past 2 years since the COVID-19 pandemic began. The inquiry included 3 Downing Street parties already made public. Gray's report says it's difficult to justify the gatherings given COVID countermeasures which had been in place. The report also slammed drinking at the gatherings as inappropriate. Well, today marks the first day of the Chinese New Year and the beginning of the Year of the Tiger. It's a time of family gatherings. Authorities say more than 86 million railway trips have been made between January the 17th and the 31st, an increase of 65% from the same period of last year. The Chinese mainland has reported COVID-19 outbreaks in parts of the country, including the capital, but these are well under control. During a 7-day holiday that started yesterday, families reunite, pay respects to ancestors, and attend celebrations. The festive atmosphere is not limited to China. Other countries have also sent their greetings to the Chinese. Well, the China Media Group has staged its annual gala to celebrate the Spring Festival. It attracted more than 4.9 billion views and 360 million likes as of midnight. This year featured main national events of 2021. They include the country's rural rejuvenation, the fight against COVID-19, and the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics. Viewers were treated to displays of advanced technologies like augmented and extended reality and a 720-degree curved LED screen, bringing an immersive experience. The 3 taikonauts aboard China's space station, Tiangong, extended their Lunar New Year wishes via video link to all Chinese. The gala is the world's most watched TV show, a part of China's modern traditions. Anchors from CGTN also participated this year. Well, Shangzhou 13 crew aboard China's space station have welcomed the Year of the Tiger. This is the first time the Chinese New Year has been celebrated in space. Zhai Jingang, Wang Yaping, and Ye Guangfu have sent their greetings from Tiangong, heavenly place.
在新春来临之际，我在我们中国的空间站里祝愿全国人民新春愉快，阖家幸福。祝愿我们伟大的祖国繁荣昌盛，国泰民安。
The International Olympic Committee President Thomas Bach is in Beijing and celebrating the Lunar New Year. Speaking in Mandarin, he wished the Chinese people a happy and successful Year of the Tiger. He says it's the opportunity for a double celebration.
Dear Olympic friends, 祝大家新春快乐，虎年大吉. This Year of the Tiger is also an Olympic year. So let us celebrate the Olympic spirit together at the Olympic Winter Games Beijing 2022.
Well, the China Media Group has staged its annual gala to celebrate the Spring Festival. 19 anchors from CGTN joined Hong Kong pop diva Coco Lee and baritone Liao Changyang on stage to sing Light Up the Dream, the theme song of the Beijing Winter Olympics. Well, I am Richard Nta, and I'll be back shortly with more news from the continent in Africa Live. Thanks for watching.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
After weeks of verbal escalation, Mali gives French ambassador 72 hours to leave the country. The AU suspends Burkina Faso after coup as ECOWAS delegates begin talks. And China Media Group marks Lunar New Year with welcomes Beijing Winter Olympics in Nairobi. Hello, welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at other stories making headlines this hour. The International Monetary Fund flags Ghana's debt levels as the country seeks international financing. And in sports, Gabon forward Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang signs for Barcelona on transfer deadline day. Once again, welcome to Africa Live. Great to have you along with us. Let's begin with the Burkina Faso coup update. The African Union has suspended Burkina Faso over the country's military coup last week. The bloc says the suspension will last until constitutional order returns. Burkina Faso had already been suspended by the Economic Community of West Africa States, or ECOWAS. United Nations and ECOWAS representatives met with ousted President Kabore on Monday. One official says the deposed leader is in good spirits. The ECOWAS delegation also held talks with coup leaders. Meanwhile, the army announced their leader, Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Damiba, as Burkina Faso's new president. The 41-year-old was presented as the head of the patriotic movement for safeguard and restoration, which seized power last week. Damiba says constitutional order will be restored when conditions are right. In Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso's capital, voices rose to decry the suspension of the nation by the AU.
ECOWAS and the African Union only intervene when a president is in trouble. They do not intervene when the country is on fire. Is the African Union aware of what we IDPs are going through here? Are they aware of the number of people, sometimes 10 or 20, who die among us every day? Why don't they intervene at this level? Now that the regime of President Kabore has been judged incapable and has been overthrown, they rush to come to Burkina Faso.
The African Union must analyze the problems that plague the sub-region before suspending a country, because the military did not take power because they have arms or for pleasure, but they took arms to meet a crucial need of the moment. This is a security issue, and the politicians or the African Union must have to make sure that this security issue is addressed.
And in other news, Mali has given French Ambassador Joel Mayer 72 hours in which to leave the country after comments by the former colonial power labeled as hostile and outrageous. The statement read on local television on Monday condemned the remarks by French Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian. Le Drian said on Friday that Mali's military government was, quote, out of control, close quote. This comes amid escalating tensions between the West African state and its European partners following two coups. Le Drian also called Mali's military government illegitimate, and French Defense Minister Florence Parly on Saturday said French troops would not stay in Mali if the price was too high. The statement by Mali was termed the remarks as contrary to the development of friendly relations between the nations. There has been no immediate comment from Paris. And let's bring in Ryan Thompson in Paris. Ryan, welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us here on Africa Live. Bilateral relations between France and Mali's interim authorities have deteriorated in recent weeks. What is driving the latest tensions?
Hi there, Richard. Well, you gave a pretty good summary of it. It started the new year on a bad note, and it's managed to actually get worse week by week. the escalation of those harsh comments from the French Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian just last week, calling the junta an illegitimate governing power and saying that they were taking irresponsible decisions, notably by blocking European forces from fighting certain insurgencies within the country. Of course, the Malian foreign minister came out swinging, saying that this is insulting and we won't accept these types of comments. He said nothing could be ruled out in terms of the retaliation action that would be taken by the government in Mali. And of course, that ended up being not just calling for the French ambassador to come see the government, but actually giving him 72 hours to leave. So far, we have yet to hear any action from Paris, but we're also hearing from sources here that nothing is ruled off the table just yet.
All right, Ryan, also France has also expressed concern over the presence of Russian troops in Mali. How does this concern France, considering it has been scaling down?
Yeah, well, France has been scaling down going into the new year and has quite a smaller set of troops there than when they first set out in 2013 with the military mission. But comments from not just France, but other European and Western powers have been concerned about the Russian presence in Mali, which they say are actually mercenaries from the controversial Wagner group. Mali asserts that this is not the case at all. This is simply training because they have acquired a number of Russian military equipment, notably planes and weapons, and it is simply cheaper for the trainers to come to Mali than for the military to head to Russia to do the training. Western powers saying that is not the case. They believe that these are mercenaries from the Wagner group, in fact, and there seems to be a growing anti-French sentiment over the past few weeks that's coupling in here at the same time, with many protests and many people saying that the French presence in the country brought no security benefit and actually left them worse off after all these years.
Well, all right, Ryan Thompson in Paris, thank you for your insight and analysis. Let's turn our attention to the Ethiopian Airlines incident. The airlines on Tuesday set to operate the Boeing 737 MAX for the first time since the 2019 crash that killed 157 people. Flight 302 from Addis Ababa to Nairobi plunged 6 minutes after takeoff, 5 minutes after a similar crash in Indonesia that left 189 people dead. The twin disaster and subsequent scrutiny triggered the global grounding of the aircraft. State-owned Ethiopian Airlines had long said it would be the last carrier to use a single-aisle jets again. In a statement, the airline said the decision to resume 737 MAX flights came after, quote, intense recertification, close quote, by regulators. The airline says the first passenger flight is scheduled to take off today without giving details. South Africa is in its peak malaria season, but many malaria cases are being misdiagnosed as COVID-19. And that's because malaria and COVID-19 have similar non-specific early symptoms. Those include fever, chills, headaches, fatigue, and muscle pain. Undiagnosed and untreated, malaria rapidly progresses to severe illness with a potentially fatal outcome. Angela Coppola has the story.
Malaria has been on the decline for the past 2 years due to those COVID-19 travel restrictions. That's all changing now.
But with the rains, reduction in travel restrictions, we found people are traveling a lot more, going to malaria endemic areas, and we're seeing cases go up. And added to the cases going up, what we have noticed is that there have been quite a few increases in cases in severe malaria, first of all. And then in the endemic areas, more concerningly, quite a few deaths have been reported. And when we do the investigation into both the severe malaria as well as the deaths, what we are noticing is that it's either very late diagnosis or misdiagnosis at the initial stages.
Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Botswana, and Eswatini have been identified as the high-risk neighbours. South African provinces bordering those countries are also at risk. And that includes Limpopo, northern KwaZulu-Natal, and Mpumalanga.
You know, obviously mosquitoes don't observe any borders, and so they can move. And what we have found, and it's something that's been reported for years, and it's called, sometimes you can hear it as airport malaria. So mosquito would be traveling caught in a bag, or in South Africa or in Africa, what we find is the mosquito gets caught in a truck or in a taxi that is crossing borders, and it will come from an endemic area. move into a most likely a non-endemic area, and then when it gets released, it's going to be really hungry, and it's going to bite the first person that it sees.
Healthcare professionals have an important role to play in malaria detection.
In the case of taxi malaria, if they see the patient getting progressively sicker and they can't diagnose anything else, just do a malaria test. So we definitely want people to do a malaria test if they've been in an endemic area and start treatment as soon as possible. And what we do want the patients to do, if they started treatment, to finish the course completely.
According to the WHO's latest World Malaria Report, there were an estimated 627,000 malaria deaths worldwide in 2020. Sub-Saharan Africa accounted for 96% of those deaths, and about 80% of those deaths are among children under 5. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
You're watching Africa Live. We'll see you on the other side of the break with more news stories. Here's what's ahead.
10, 9, 8.
Pomp and color as Chinese in Kenya ring the new year, welcoming the year of the tiger.
The Swahili Coast, also known as the East African coastline, has been an area of ancient commerce and culture for over a millennium. Yvonne Awor is an award-winning author who has written a book inspired by the Swahili coast. Mwamaka Sharifa is a Kenyan-born, Chinese-trained medical doctor who stands as a testament to the diverse connection the region has with the outside world. While Caesar Bita is an underwater archaeologist who has been scouring the depths of the Indian Ocean in search of artifacts that tell the ancient history of the region. These individuals, each with their own quest for historical discovery, find themselves drifting towards an ocean that causes their paths to cross.
Dancing together. Sharing laughter.
Compartimos ilusiones.
Mientras atestiguamos el inicio de 2022.
C'est super.
C'est chouette, hein?
Oui. Grandissons ensemble. نتطلع معا نحو المستقبل.
نجتمع معا في وئام.
Вместе любим. Костя.
Данилка, привет.
Благополучие в новом году. Have a prosperous year of the tiger.
We wish you peace and prosperity.
Mucha salud y prosperidad en el año nuevo.
Que tous nos meilleurs vœux
De bonheur, de santé et succès vous accompagnent en 2022.
عيد ربيع سعيد وكل عام وأنتم بخير.
С Новым годом, с новым счастьем.
新春快乐2022 CGTN 和你一起向未来。
Welcome back to Africa Live. Thanks for staying with us. Chinese Lunar New Year celebrations have kicked off across the world, highlighting the importance of cultural exchanges between China and the rest of the world. The celebrations to mark China's Lunar New Year are meant to promote mutual understanding and communication between different cultures. CGTN's Daniel Arapmoy reports.
10, 9, 8.
Revelers flock to ring in the Chinese Lunar New Year and welcome the fast approaching Beijing Winter Olympics at a celebratory event hosted by the China Media Group in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Held at the Two Rivers Mall, a major shopping center in the East African metropolis, the celebration centered on a real-time live screening of the China Media Group's Spring Festival Gala show. The annual televised event is recognized as the most widely watched TV show in the world.
China has always been the biggest supporter of Africa, and this celebration of New Year is an indication of the long history and cultural heritage that Africa and China has shared.
Basically what it means is that there's a lot of influence now, and it is getting culturally acceptable in the whole world. I mean, from America to Asia to Europe to Africa. This is Kenya right now, and you can see that there's a lot of enthusiasm. And so, yes, I think the Chinese culture is really, becoming pervasive around the world.
Chinese New Year has become one of the most widely celebrated festivals, not just in China, but across the world. Revelers had the opportunity to sample Chinese delicacies while enjoying performances, participating in lucky draws, and getting a taste of the unique traditions associated with this ancient holiday.
It's my first time, so it's an interesting tradition to watch. It's very colorful, and I'm here for all of it.
I'm glad I'm enjoying their culture. I'm yet to enjoy their food, though. I hope I will. Yes.
At the stroke of midnight in China, which marked the start of the lunar year of the tiger, Africa's largest Ferris wheel, the Eye of Kenya, was illuminated with the color red, symbolic of luck and good fortune in Chinese culture. The celebration was also an opportunity for Kenyans to look ahead towards the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics, due to kick off in the Chinese capital later this week. The Swahili language version of the Winter Olympics theme song featured on Monday's soundtrack. The Games will see athletes from 5 African countries, including Kenya, Eritrea, Madagascar, Morocco, and Nigeria, compete. This will make Beijing the first city in history to host both a summer and winter Olympics. Daniel Arap Moi, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
African leaders are sending in their New Year wishes to China. Today marks the first day of the Year of the Tiger, according to the Chinese lunar calendar. Let's listen in to messages from Babangida Njoroge, the chairman of the Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission, and Felix Mutati, Zambia's Minister for Technology and Science.
I wish them Happy New Year, prosperous New Year of the Tiger, and I wish them well. We look on China as our big brother to assist, and so many other important projects like the Route Belt Initiative that talks about connectivity, like the railway system that currently China are doing. So I think that would go a long way in promoting economic growth and development in the country.
I wish to extend on behalf of the government and the people of Zambia our most heartfelt wishes for good health and happiness for all of you, and to the friendly people of the People's Republic of China. I also wish to take this opportunity to congratulate the government and the people of China for their impressive success in transforming the country into a digital economy.
The president of the Tanzania National Olympic Committee has sent his best wishes for the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing. Gulad Rashid is himself a former player and coach of the Tanzania national football team. He was among the Tanzanian delegation to China in 2008 and says he was impressed by the success of the Beijing Summer Olympics. The 2022 Winter Olympics and Paralympic Games are set to start on February the 4th. Rashid says he is against the politicization of the Games.
Unfortunately, Tanzania is not taking part in Winter Games, but we support the hosting of Winter Games by Beijing City. So we hope everything will be very nice. I understand that the host country has organized the games at a maximum well. They have done it in the hope that all participants will enjoy, especially the athletes.
With the Winter Olympics about to begin in China, the country's ambassador to South Sudan is using the occasion to spread the word about the spirit of the Games. Ambassador Hua Ning visited an orphanage in the capital, Juba, where he also encouraged people to try more sports. CGTN's Patrick Ayette reports.
It may be almost 10,000 kilometers from Beijing, but China's ambassador to South Sudan is trying to spread more Olympic cheer. He is using the games as a chance for children to learn about some of the values, spreading a message of peace, harmony, solidarity, and hope.
It's very important to bring the Olympic Games to South Sudan and also to the children here at the orphanage. You know, participation is not only about the professional competition in the sports arena. The Olympic Games, its goal is to invite and encourage more people, especially the children and the young generation, to join the sport.
Although COVID-19 measures will make the Winter Games a very different spectacle to usual, the message here is that Beijing is all set for competition to begin. The Chinese ambassador to South Sudan says it has been 7 years of preparations after winning the qualification for hosting the Games. All is now set for the competition. For the children here in this orphanage, it was a chance to learn about winter sports, and the Chinese embassy also provided gifts to the orphans, including Olympic medals, sport equipment, and school bags.
Thank you very much for the effort the Chinese are doing in South Sudan, your government, and in particular representing your government, that we appreciate your work very much.
The ambassador was joined by the Chinese medical team who are based here in South Sudan and involved using the Olympics to bring some joy and help strengthen close ties between the two countries. Patrick Koyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
The news continues on Africa Live. We've got our business segment coming up next. Stay tuned. Here's what's ahead. South Africa to no longer require asymptomatic COVID-19 patients to isolate. And the International Monetary Fund flags Ghana's debt levels as the country seeks international financing.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Aden, Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia,
Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to South Africa. Welcome back to Africa Live, rather. Thanks for staying with us. South Africa no longer requires those who test positive for COVID-19 without symptoms to isolate. The country has also reduced the isolation period for those with symptoms by 3 days. They will now only isolate for 7 days instead of 10 days. Contacts do not have to isolate unless they develop symptoms. These developments follow a cabinet meeting on Monday as the country exits its fourth wave of the virus. This puts South Africa at the lowest of its 5-stage COVID alert levels. A statement by Monli Gungubele, minister in the presidency, indicated that the rationale for the amendments was informed by the proportion of people with immunity to COVID-19. This has risen substantially, exceeding 60 to 80% following several surveys, according to the statement. Well, still in the country, minor Anglo Gold Ashanti says it expects its annual earnings to slump by up to 42%. It attributes the drop to lower gold sales, increased inflationary pressures, and pandemic-fueled impact on costs. The gold miner says it expects headline earnings per share, the main profit measure in South Africa, to come in at between $1.37 and $1.53 for the year ended December 31st, 2021. Last year, the company reported headline earnings per share of $2.38. South Africa's top miner reiterated its previous annual output forecast of 2.427 million ounces compared to the 3.047 million ounces it produced in the previous year. The impact on production last year due to the coronavirus crisis was estimated at 47 kilo ounces. It mainly affected companies' operations in Ghana, Brazil, and Argentina. Now, Total Energies aims to restart a $20 billion liquefied natural gas project in the north of Mozambique this year. The project was halted following an attack on the town of Palma by an insurgent group with links to Islamic State almost a year ago. Chief Executive Patrick Punyani says that the project will restart once he sees that life is back to normal in the town, meaning a return of state services to the people. The Punyani visited Mozambique on Monday. He also signed a deal to train 2,500 young Mozambicans in a way that will help them contribute to the project. The young people will do such things as growing vegetables that they can sell to feed workers on the project. Total Energies had intended for the project to produce its first cargo in 2024. Well, still from Total, the company is this Tuesday expected to make an announcement on its much delayed final investment decision for a crude oil production project in Uganda. This is in partnership with China's CNOOC. We keep an eye on that and will update in subsequent bulletins. Moving on, in Ghana, the Monetary Policy Committee has held the benchmark interest rate at 14.5% in a bid to assess the impact of the previous hike. It has further urged the government to implement proposed spending cuts to moderate inflation. At the same time, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank says the nation is at high risk of debt distress, and this could further complicate its plans of borrowing from international capital markets. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai reports from Accra.
Ghana wants to borrow $750 million from the international capital market, with the option of further increasing by another $750 million to fund this year's budget expenditure. But the World Bank says sub-Saharan African countries, including Ghana, may find it difficult to borrow from the international market due to high debt portfolio and debt sustainability concerns. Ghana's total debt is currently more than $54 billion, about 78% of its gross domestic product. Still, the government says it has met with investors to assure them of the need to support Ghana's economic recovery.
Altogether, these investors have assets under management in excess of over $4 trillion. They also actively participate and hold Eurobonds, and they've been all following keenly Ghana's development story. As a government, we felt it necessary to speak directly with our investors and assure them of the steady progress being made towards economic rebound, anchored on fiscal consolidation and debt sustainability.
Analysts, however, believe the government's move is unsustainable.
The problem with this, though, is that it crowds out funding for the private sector. The more the government borrows, the less money there is for the private sector. The less money there is for the private sector, there's less access to finance, interest rates go up, and the litany of woes continue.
Analysts want the government to widen the tax net in order to raise enough revenue for its expenditure.
We collect so little tax. That's why we are running those budget deficits year in, year out. And our issue is so poor that the tax revenue doesn't even cover recurrent expenditure.
According to the government's data, out of Ghana's 12 million working population who are eligible to pay tax, only 2 million pay their taxes. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
After centuries of using an iron stamp to verify the authenticity of gold, Egypt is stepping up security measures for precious metals. Cairo is introducing a microscopic laser stamp and QR code for each jewelry piece. Now, the new technology will help in curbing forgery and create a registry of all gold products in the country. CGTN's Adel El Marroui reports.
Precious metals like gold are not considered genuine in Egypt without the government's authentication stamp. The Egyptian Authority for Stamping Jewelry and Minting of Scales is the government's body responsible for them.
All jewelry and precious metals must be analyzed here before being offered at the market. If a piece matches the information given, it gets stamped with the number of carats indicated. If a piece is off by 4 points, we give it back to the producer to recalibrate the metal. If it's more than 4 points, we break the piece and give it back to avoid selling it.
For decades, the process for verifying precious metals has been traditional. This was done using a stamp that only indicates the type of metal, and its carats is engraved on every piece. But as the process proved to be flawed, Egypt is introducing new technologies for authenticating precious stones and metals.
We are working on a plan to introduce technology to develop the authority services. Currently, we authenticate using a kind of stamp that is hammered to the piece. The downside is that it affects the shape of the jewelry, sometimes ruining it. Plus, it can be replicated. We've seized many forged stamps in the market. We are about to put an end to it with the lesser stamps.
The government is planning to engrave microscopic QR codes on each piece. Using laser technology, the unique code will include information like the total weight of the product, the details of precious stones used, the date of authentication, and a picture of the piece. Data will be protected using blockchain, which the government says is the best security for this project.
الدنيا كلها بتتطور واحنا لازم نتطور كمان بالطريقة اللي احنا بندمج بيها.
This new technology has many benefits for us. It will open up exporting opportunities for Egyptian jewelry. Many countries rejected the traditional authentication stamp because it was written in Arabic and it somewhat tarnishes the final look of the product.
This step is very beneficial for both retailers and clients. The process of authentication used to take a lot of time and there was always room for suspicion. At the same time, most clients don't have the necessary information to know the reality of what they are buying. This coding system will boost confidence and will very likely increase sales in the jewelry market.
The entire authentication process will be digitized. Producers will book online appointments to drop off their products and will get a digital report for each item submitted. Egypt used to be a regional leader in jewelry, but in recent years it has lagged behind countries like Turkey and the UAE. This new authentication method is part of a national plan to revive the market and create a gold city, which is expected to be a massive free zone for trading precious metals and stones.
The government is still in the testing phase of this new authentication technology. It is expected to be implemented by the end of the year at the most. When it takes effect, the QR code will be like a birth certificate for each jewelry piece in Egypt, which will help the government to monitor and therefore regulate trade in precious metals. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
And we are not done just yet. We've got your sports news coming up after the break. Stay tuned. Here's what's ahead.